because nutrition is so different from person to person, that's why I feel like a dietitian is so important. You can't just follow a standard meal plan and see results.
Welcome to the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast that takes you on a fascinating journey into the hearts and minds of the amazing people who work in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. My name is Veronica, and I am a PhD candidate studying fat-based food emulsions. On this podcast, we share insights from professionals at all stages of their careers, find out what they do, why they do it, and how they are changing the food world one day at a time. So no matter what your passion is, there's always something for everyone in food, and we'll help you find it. Hello everyone, welcome back to the FoodGrads Podcast. I'm your host Veronica, and in today's episode we are learning about what a dietitian is, the different areas that they can work in, difficulties finding a role in your field after graduation, and food philosophies. Our guest today is Jasmine Kwok, registered dietitian. Jasmine is a registered dietitian who is enthusiastic about regulatory affairs and nutrition promotion in the retail grocery space. She has completed her mandatory dietetic internships at hospitals and long-term care centers. Since then, she has worked in sports medicine rehabilitation clinics, long-term care centers, home care, and retail. She is passionate about educating consumers on how to buy nutritious foods and ensuring food products are safe and accurate. This episode of the podcast is powered by Careers Now. Careers Now is Food and Beverage Ontario's multi-year workforce development initiative that is connecting students and job seekers with employers in Ontario's food and beverage processing industry for exciting career opportunities. Check out careersnow.ca for more information on exciting jobs, career information, industry mentors, and training opportunities for professional development. Hi, Jasmine. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Veronica. It's a pleasure to be here.
How have you been doing so far this week?
Well, it's been wonderful. The weather in Toronto has been great. I know it's a little hot for some people, but I love it.
I think I'm one of those people, but I know for many it's very welcoming. So, you know what? I guess if it gets us outside, which I think after a very long winter this year with a lot of cloud, I think a lot of people could welcome the sun.
Absolutely.
So again, thank you, Jasmine, for coming on the show, and I'm really excited to have you on. I think what you're doing is really cool, and I love how you've kind of taken your degree and you've tried out all these different aspects and seen where you landed. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your current role?
For sure. So I'm a registered dietitian. I currently reside in Ontario and I've been in RD for the last 5 years. I completed my bachelor's of nutritional science and dietetics at McGill, actually, which is in Montreal. And I actually went to Ryerson for 1 year prior to that in the nutrition and food program, which is really fun. And currently, I am settling into a new role in regulatory affairs for food at a major supermarket chain.
Well, congratulations for that. And, I already have to dive right into there because as someone who goes to TMU, formerly Ryerson, I know that Ryerson is very well regarded for its dietitian program. And I was curious, when you said McGill, why that switch?
It was really for the integrated internship program that they offer. For those listening that may not be familiar with the process of becoming a dietitian, typically the universities that are accredited for nutrition programs provide a 4-year undergraduate program. And then after you graduate, it's kind of a very competitive race to acquire the internship you need to become an RD. But with McGill, they offer a program where it's integrated. So once you are part of the program, you'll get those internships throughout your summers and throughout the years that you are in the program.
Wow, I had no idea. I assumed that every program or every school would do the same thing where it's somewhat like a co-op program where you have to really go out and find your own. So I could definitely see why you decided to make the switch.
Yeah, and I know I've heard a lot of stories about dietitians having quite a struggle with finding internships. So when I heard about the program at McGill, it was a definite move for me.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about those internships because I know, like you just said, a lot of students struggle with that. And I've seen through your LinkedIn, you've done a lot of different internships. And I'd be curious if you could maybe walk slightly through a few of them? Like, what was the experience, and then why you decided to continue on and become an in-store dietitian?
Yeah. So with the integrated program at McGill, it's a little different from other nutrition students where they may have already had their 4 years of nutrition undergrad and then they go into their internship. So at McGill, you might finish your first year and then you'll be given an internship for the summer. And then same thing as second year, you'll get your second year internship. So when you first get that internship as like a very fresh nutrition student, it is a little bit scary, but it does teach you along the way and it helps you to integrate the information that you've learned in the previous year. So I believe my very first internship was actually at McGill. It was at their food and dining services. They have Aramark, which is a food service company. So when it comes to internships, you are given a variety of internships in food service management as well as clinical nutrition. And so my next clinical nutrition internship was at the McGill University Health Center, which is similar to kind of that university health network that they have in Toronto. So it's kind of like a conglomerate of different, hospitals. So that was really interesting. I got to learn about high risk obstetrics, as well as pulmonary diseases and a bit of cardiac. And then the other type of internship that you get at McGill or as a dietetic student is a community internship slash public health internship. And I did those internships at a community food basket or community food center in Montreal, which was really interesting. And then my last few internships, as I was in my third and fourth year, were in long-term care in Toronto, as well as the Toronto District School Board Nutrition Program.
That is so amazing. I just love how it was set up that you were able to experience so many different roles, because when you're kind of stuck finding co-ops on your own, it can be, sometimes you just end up like in my case where you do all of them in one company, which although I'm very appreciative of the experience, it would have been great to just try out different things. And, being a student, being, younger, it's the perfect time to just have a little bit of a taste of everything because you really don't know yourself very well. So being able to see all these different lights, I could imagine that really also rounded you for when you completed your overall degree.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It was so fun to learn about dietitians in different industries and different parts of the like food system. And that really opened up my perspective for when I did graduate. I didn't try to just stick with clinical dietetics or working in a hospital, which is a very typical route for a new dietetic student. It opened up my eyes to like industry, and that's actually why I wanted to work at the grocery store as an in-store dietitian, because I saw how you could use all the skills that you acquired throughout your internship and really put it into this role.
So I actually want to dive a little bit deeper into, we've been using the term like dietitian and such, but as we can tell, like that means a lot of different things. And I guess, well, how do I want to word this question? I guess I want to get a better understanding of exactly of like what you do in terms of, maybe we could talk about the in-store registered dietitian. Like how is that different than someone who works, say, in clinical? And, where do you I just have a lot of questions, so maybe I'll let you take the lead with that.
Yeah, I can see the confusion there because in-store retail dietitian roles aren't actually very common in Canada. There's really only one major supermarket chain that I worked for that provides this service. So maybe we'll start with what a clinical dietitian is, which is that traditional role that everyone kind of thinks of, which is you're working in a hospital or some sort of healthcare institution, and individuals are coming to you when they're sick, and your job is to manage their condition with food. So maybe if they have diabetes and they just had they had something that caused them to go to the hospital, then you teach them about managing their blood sugars with food and whatnot. But once they're discharged and they maybe only saw the hospital dietitian once, they still need to manage their condition. So that's where a grocery store dietitian can come into play because ideally, like I'm thinking this person has to shop at the grocery store. So what we offer at the store are personalized consultations. So it could be doing a one-on-one session, just talking about doing an assessment and learning about what their knowledge gaps are when it comes to diabetes, for example. And then we could actually walk around the store and talk about all the different products and how to read food labels for diabetes or a specific condition. And then we do a lot more follow-up. So the services we offer at an in-store role are much more personalized. It takes a lot more time and you have much more of a relationship with the client. And so that way the client learns more practical ways to manage their condition.
So silly. I never even thought for a second that you would actually go into the store and walk around with them. Like, I feel like that's so silly not to think about, but it makes perfect sense because you're in the store with them. And supermarkets are very overwhelming, especially when you have diet choices. And then I'm curious, would you also consider someone's family at the same time when making these dietary choices or helping them along?
Yeah, if they bring that up as a challenge, let's say they're saying they have to manage their diabetes, but they also have to manage the food preferences of their picky 2-year-old, then that's something we will incorporate into their nutrition care plan. And when we're doing our grocery store walks, then we'll also talk about some family-friendly choices as well.
That's amazing. And did you particularly focus on you mentioned diabetes a lot. Would you be someone who's more well-rounded to talk about a lot of different conditions, or was there something that you were more specialized in?
There are some dietitians in our team that focus on a specific niche, for example, gut health or just diabetes or just women's health. But for the stores that I was overseeing, it seemed like there were a variety of conditions. And the top three that I ended up kind of focusing on due to the clientele there would be gut health, diabetes, as well as heart health.
Wow, that's so cool. And a lot of the knowledge that you picked up to help address these types of issues, were these things that you learned primarily at school, or are they something that you continuously learned as you went through the role?
I would say both. You learn the foundations at school, and if you're lucky enough to kind of have that specialty that you shadow during your internship, then you learn more during that. Otherwise, it would be continuing education. And our College of Dietitians, which is that regulatory body that oversees like each province of dietitians, they really emphasize continuous learning. And I'm lucky that the company that I worked for also supported this. So oftentimes, if you told them you were focusing on gut health, then they would support you in any courses that you wish to take.
That's really wonderful. And that brings me to another question that I'm thinking is, so with the regulatory body that watches over you as a dietitian, is this, I guess they would follow you out through your career, making sure that you're keeping up with certifications and such?
Yeah, you have to renew your membership every year and communicate with them what role you're taking on and how many X hours you're spending in client time. So there is a bit of administration or administrative duties that they do. And to even be a member of this college, you have to do something called the CDRE or the Canadian Dietetic registration exam, I believe it's called. And that's where you kind of learn more about the regulations around being a dietitian, the ethics of being a dietitian to do no harm and to do what's best for the client. So there are certain ethics and jurisprudence regulations that we have to follow as a dietitian.
I think that's really good that you brought that up, because one thing that I learned a few years ago was that in Canada, a nutritionist is not the same as a dietitian, although a nutritionist can act similar, like a dietitian is a protected title. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that's the case in the United States.
Yeah, you're right. It actually differs from province to province. So, generally, for most of the provinces, the title registered dietitian or dietitian is protected, like you mentioned. But I believe there's two provinces where nutritionist is protected as well. Otherwise, anyone else can call themselves a nutritionist, but not really have all of the nutrition education or background or internships that a dietitian has. And in the States, it gets even more confusing because it differs from state to state, and there's just so many states.
Wow, I didn't know that about the nutrition title, at least with the two provinces. I'm gonna have to look up which ones that is, but that's really interesting. And I think that, to my knowledge, I can't think of any other industries except for the skilled trades that also require somebody to, continue to be, I don't want to say watched, but you have to keep up your membership in order to have the title continually. Like if you become a food scientist, you never have to talk to the Food Science Council and then renew your membership and then let them know like the hours or the role you've been doing. So that's a really interesting aspect.
Yeah, that's true. I guess in a lot of food industry roles, you don't have to have a regulatory body. We are, I guess, are considered a regulated health profession. So we're more similar to that of a nurse or a physiotherapist. So any healthcare profession typically has a regulatory body or is working towards having one.
That would make sense. I mean, after all, food is medicine and it makes such a difference. Your diet can really harm your body or it can really improve your body. So, how did you get into, wanting to become a dietitian? Like, where did that passion come from?
I've actually always wanted to be a dietitian, even though I didn't really know what it entailed. I just knew ever since I was a little kid, I was super interested in nutrition and food. Even like when I was in grade five, I think I did science fair projects on nutrition topics. So I think
Nice.
I've always wanted to, and it's always been something I've been wanting to do.
That's so wonderful. I know that a lot of people can switch their dreams and such, but sometimes it's nice when you just have an idea and you go for it. I know that like you said, it's a competitive field to get into, and I can imagine it took a lot of work, but congratulations for that.
Oh, thank you.
And when it comes to your full, I know that as well, you have to there's different dietitians that can, suit someone's interest, or I shouldn't say interest, but there's certain dietitians that are more well suited for helping you along your journey. And I was curious, do you have any philosophies that you use that really help guide how you practice being a dietitian?
I always like to go back to that nutrition or food is not a one size fits all. I know that sounds a little cliche, but I really use that to fuel how I look at a client or how I respond to their needs. So, for example, like I know that we know about how to manage a certain condition like diabetes or high cholesterol, but there's much more to that. And it could be cultural preferences that differ from person to person, food preferences, or even financial status. So that's how I usually approach a client by just understanding that everyone is different and they have different needs. And by being able to listen to what their needs truly are, then you can give them the right resources to empower them to make those behavioral changes.
Wow. I really like that because it is true. I mean, one size does not fit all. I mean, it just shows how big our industry is, that there is different needs that in cultural things, just even tastes alone, you have to enjoy and love what you eat if you want to have a sustainable nutritional lifestyle. So I can understand that that would be a really good philosophy. And I don't know where I want to take this.
No, I totally agree with you. I think that's also the reason why I love being a dietitian. I know there's like very standard meal plans that you can buy from companies or following their, I don't know, supplemented food program to lose weight. But because nutrition is so different from person to person, that's why I feel like a dietitian is so important. You can't just follow a standard meal plan and see results.
That makes sense. I know that, growing up, everyone also has different foods that they might find comforting. And if you are someone who really likes, I don't know, rice, and then all of a sudden your plan is always only having bread, I don't know why I'm saying that, but it would probably like really mentally affect you as well because you have to be happy with what you're eating.
Yeah, that's definitely, I'm laughing because when I was a nutrition student, my dad got diagnosed with diabetes, and I was one of those people at the time just saying like no more rice, and he was so upset with me. And I've definitely learned from that experience that yes, you can't just tell people who like rice to eat bread. You have to really personalize their plan. And then that's when they might make some changes.
I wish it was that easy with my dad. He also has diabetes, and it's been a struggle just trying to figure out the types of foods that are more welcoming to his diet and such. I mean, it's definitely been a long process with that, and even now, even though it's been many years, we're still learning how to deal with that. But yeah, you can't change what they like in terms of food sometimes.
For sure.
And when it comes to being a dietitian, it sounds like you've learned a bit. Has there been any skills or talents that you think that someone would need in order to excel or do well in this role?
Think it depends on what role you're interested in. Maybe if you're interested in public health nutrition, those skills might differ from somebody who wants to be a clinical dietitian. And I identify myself more as like an industry dietitian. I don't necessarily love working in clinical only, but I do love working in a space where I can apply things like my business skills and collaboration skills. So speaking from my experiences working as an in-store dietitian, some of the skills that have been really important is not only having those clinical nutrition skills and counseling skills to see your clients, but also business skills like learning how to market yourself and market to people so that you can build up your clientele. It could also be teamwork skills because you're working with a huge team across Canada to put nutrition programs in place at the grocery store. So collaboration skills are very important. And just having a growth mindset in general. So things in a business are always changing. So you always have to have that growth mindset and be open to being flexible and adaptable and moving forwards.
No, that was not the answer I was expecting. I was not expecting to hear business. That is so interesting.
Yeah, I know. I think like when in the past when we've explained our role to students and nutrition students, they're always very fearful of learning about business skills because that is nothing about what we learn about in nutrition or dietetics school. Like we learn only about clinical nutrition and counseling. But what I've learned now that I've graduated is that business skills are so important as well as networking, and that can really take you very far by
Did,
strengthening those skills.
did you, I mean, obviously you had to learn more about these skills after you graduated. Was there any resources or books or anything in particular that you really resonated with when you were trying to learn more about this area?
I would say I'm still learning, but when I graduated, it was very difficult to get a position because of several reasons. Maybe we'll talk about them later, but because of my student loans, I really wanted to get a job fast. And so I started a job that was completely unrelated to dietetics. I worked in insurance and I sold like car and home insurance.
What?
Yeah. Um,
Okay, wow.
and that actually taught me a lot about like business skills and sales and, you know, working in a call center is very different from working in a hospital. So even though my mood was a little dampened from having to work in that type of role, it made me realize that it differentiated me from others who may not have had an experience like that. So that role really helped me kind of understand the importance of business skills.
Wow. Okay. I never thought I was going to hear that because, a lot of people when they talk about, oh, I had to take a different role before I got into the role that I really wanted, they might say something like I went into QA instead or I worked on the manufacturing floor. But I mean, you switched up the entire industry, so that definitely would differentiate you.
Yeah, I don't talk about it often, but I definitely use those skills, I feel like every day still.
Well, I can imagine there was a lot of talking, like back and forth to clients and such in terms of that area.
Yeah, and it's really funny because I feel like it actually prepared me for the in-store role. When I joined the in-store role, it was just right before COVID hit, and then we switched to virtual counseling where we were talking on the phone to clients call after call every day. So working in a call center really helped me with that.
That's awesome. That is so cool. And I think that it points out a thing that it's always good not to pigeonhole yourself into just one thing, even though, for example, with your career path, you really wanted to be a dietitian and you went for it and such, sometimes it's good to have outside experience that's not really directly related to what you're doing. And maybe I can also attest to this with this podcast and such. I've been doing my PhD, I've gone to school a lot, and I've been just doing these conversations, over Zoom, having them. And recently I went to an event and I was asked impromptu to be the person who does the interview on camera. And years ago, I would have freaked out and I would have been like, I'm not good for this, or like I had a whole montage in my head. But I was just like, okay, let's do this. And I jumped in on it. And it never occurred to me that I was growing. And sometimes I think we can forget, like, this comes back to those transferable skills. Maybe someone doesn't want to get a job at a fast food place for part-time work to get extra money for their student loans, or maybe they don't want to work at a restaurant and such, but there's a lot that you can be learned. And sometimes it's good to also just like give yourself a mental break as well, because you don't really know what you know until you start applying it and you just start drawing from it. So I guess I can attest to that too.
That's amazing. Yeah, for sure. Like you never know when the skills that you've learned can come in handy in future opportunities, and those opportunities will really, set you forward. So being open and just trying to apply your transferable skills wherever you are can be so helpful.
And I love, again, that you went back to saying it was a business to build on your business skills, because how do I want to say this? To build on your business skills in sense that you always want to be marketing yourself, even if you're not doing a marketing role. Unfortunately, we live in a time where, to get your next position and such, it can help you really in the long run to be able to just self-promote. And if you don't know how to do that, it can really diminish to some of the roles. So even though you might have really strong skills and you might be a great scientist or you might be a great dietitian, if you can't translate that to others, it could be to your own detriment and you won't be able to show that to others.
That's very true. Yeah.
Would you have any, on that note, for students, would you have any suggestions for students who are still in school to maybe learn how to market themselves or learn how to attain those business skills before they graduate?
Yeah, I would say try to build connections early on, even when you are in school. Even if you have no idea what you want to do after you graduate, the more you meet different people, it helps you understand where you may want to be. And then learning about their career path also gives you more perspective as well. And the more you meet people, the more you have to introduce yourself and talk about yourself. So that practice can really come into handy when it comes to finally doing interviews and talking about yourself again to future employers. So hopefully that answered your question.
For sure. And just because I'm not too familiar, are there any associations or trade groups that are relevant to the space that you're in that maybe someone might want to check out?
Yeah, there's the Dietitians of Canada Association, and they are different from the college that's like a regulatory body for different provinces. They're more of a membership to provide support to dietitians across Canada, and anybody can join. There are, I believe, rates that are for students, so it's a little cheaper when you're a student versus if you're a full-time dietitian.
Awesome. I can't wait to share that in the resources. And I know from personal experience too, it's also great to look at your bulletins and keep up to date with your school programs, because they do offer a lot of networking events, especially the more niche programs. And I know at TMU, they had some industry nights where they would bring dietitians in from. The reason I know this, even though I didn't go into that field, was when I was in my first year, I was trying to connect with food science or anyone in the food industry. And I noticed, literally just walking in the hallway, they were having a pamphlet for guest speakers for dietitians to come in. And they had one person who worked at Campbell's as a dietitian. So they were helping with like product labels, helping creating like healthier products and such. And I jumped in on their event, and it was really great to just get to know these individuals, and I actually was able to talk to them outside of the events. So I also recommend checking out your school's events and keeping up with the emails. There's actually some, as much as they're annoying, there's actually some good information that gets put out there.
Yeah, for sure. I think I actually went to one of those Ryerson networking events for dietitians and nutrition students, and it actually gave me a lot of different connections and to learn about different positions. So I would highly recommend that as well.
It would be funny if we went to the same one a long time ago. I don't know if our years at the school overlapped at that time, but maybe, maybe.
It
Oh,
is a small world.
no, it was a great event, and and it also gets you in a lower stress environment, because I find actually having more students around me makes you, even if you don't talk to someone, it might just get you out of your comfort zone enough to go, okay, next time I'm going to ask a question and such. And because it's done by the university, they tend to be more organized and more understanding of the students' needs. And I think that's also a really good icebreaker as well, because you can just talk about your program as such.
I like how you mentioned that it's really organized because it actually is. It's great to have something that where they have speakers and panelists and you have time to ask your questions. There are some events where it's not as organized. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I also was, okay, I'm going to cycle back to it because I have to jump on it a little bit. You did mention that there was a little bit of a difficult transition between going from school graduation to the dietitian role in store. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, and if you would be open to maybe talking about how you were able to find that job after being out of the industry for a few months, because I know when you're graduating, that few months seems like the longest time of your life.
Yeah, it definitely felt very long. And it was a little difficult for me, I would say, because I went to school in Montreal and had all my connections in another province. But when I moved back to Ontario, it was difficult because I didn't have any connections that could help me go into a hospital, and I didn't really have internships that were in Toronto. And so I felt like I was just starting from scratch. And another reason why it was difficult was because I had to wait around 8 months to complete and receive the results of my CDRE or registration exam to actually become a dietitian. So there was that big time gap in between. But all this to say, I remember I was submitting application after application and it was really difficult. So that's why I ended up taking on a role in a call center for insurance. But I was working part-time at the cooking school at a local grocery store, which was actually one of my favorite jobs. We prepared classes with chefs and we helped people or taught people how to cook different recipes, which is so much fun. But through this, I actually got my first role as a dietitian working for a YouTuber and helping her launch her website on meal planning. And eventually that kind of gave me the motivation to start a private practice and work at a sports medicine clinic to help individuals with their sports nutrition. And then alongside with that, I started working in long-term care in about three different locations in Napanee and Prince Edward County. So if you are from Toronto, you'll know that's about like an hour to 2 hours away from here. And I was working that 3 days a week and then working in that private practice clinic in Toronto 2 or 3 days a week. So it's a lot of driving on my end.
Oh my gosh, that's insane. That is
Yeah.
insane.
So I guess one of my advice there would be if you're having difficulty finding a job, don't if you have the resources and flexibility to look away from Toronto because it's so competitive. Look at other cities and be open to moving away for a little bit. Just get a bit of experience, add it to your resume, and then it'll be so much easier to get a job later on. And because of those experiences, it helped me land my position as an in-store dietitian in Kingston, Ontario, which is even further from Toronto. And I worked there for about 2 years when I was finally able to transfer to a Toronto location.
That's impressive. Wow. I love that you were open to going to new places, because I never even thought about it, because I've been so set being in the GTA that I've realized that a lot of my connections are here. But I could imagine, yes, coming from McGill and the Montreal and then going back to your hometown, that you won't have any new connections. So, that's actually maybe another thing to think about if someone was still in school. Maybe if they're doing their informational interviews, make sure that they reach out maybe to individuals who might be in the same area as they potentially could be, because that might just start a conversation and you never know where that could take you.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'd never thought of that too when I graduated, evidently. So another piece of advice would be if you know you're going back to a different province after you graduate, start to network while you're still a student and try to get those connections in that city so that you're not kind of scrambling after you graduate.
One thing I would have been really wanting to ask you, because I'm learning a lot about this, is has there actually been anything that's surprised you in your career that you just never expected?
It's a good question. I would still say it was the business skills that really surprised me because throughout my undergrad, I was just so focused on nutrition and clinical nutrition, and I was just in my little circle of other student dietitians. And then when I got out into the real world, there were so many other types of people. So just learning how to talk to different types of people, networking skills, as well as working in a team is so important. And those are things you will not learn in school and you have to learn on the job. So if you ever do network with other people, try to learn about how they acquired those skills and any tips that they might have.
Yes, I definitely have to agree with that. And maybe one thing I could suggest as well is I know that social media, it can be a bad thing, but there are some good places for it. And I do think that if we're talking about the business skills or those marketing skills, it might be worth it to even like create an Instagram related to food, or if you just, I'm thinking to become like the dietitian and such, maybe share recipes and such, not really to get a big following, but I think maybe to better understand just the idea of marketing and have something to have an online presence. I know for me personally, blogging really helped myself. I actually wrote blog posts on the different flavors, like chemical compounds of flavors in foods, and I actually got an interview out of that. I don't know how that happened, but it really helps you change your mindset, not because you want to just get followers for it, but just understanding how to promote yourself. And I don't know, I just think it's cool, and it's like a low risk thing if you're not if you have the time and such, and it also can take your mind off of school only.
And it's also like a bit of a creative outlet too, because in school you're doing these prescribed, homework or readings, but when you do something on your own, you learn how to promote yourself, but you also learn about being creative and applying the information that you've learned in a way that you want to communicate with the world. So I totally agree with that. I started an Instagram just like you did with your blog for that same reason. And it did help me a lot in my in-store role because one of my main sources of getting clientele was through social media. And if I didn't have that experience before of starting a little bit of an Instagram, I don't think I would have been as comfortable moving to that in my role.
That's really cool. Okay, so it's not just me. And I feel like Instagram and really lends itself well to building yourself up as a dietitian. And now correct me if I'm wrong, just because you're able to promote healthy foods and different recipes and, sharing it with the world.
Yeah, it's a great outlet for sure, especially in these times. I think in the past, blogs or, just writing a handout might have been more applicable to what was going on. But nowadays, everything is online and there is already so much misinformation about nutrition online. So having a voice and being able to give the right info is always fulfilling.
That's a really good point. Actually, maybe we can get to that question. Is there any types of misinformation that you really try to not go against, but is there any misinformation that really maybe annoys you that you really want to push out and really give good information for?
I think there's always a lot of misinformation about weight, about like what to think about your own weight, as well as what to do for weight loss. So that always boils my blood. But lately, lately I've been seeing a lot of individuals online just in a grocery store and giving a lot of misinformation about food labels and promoting that sort of fear mongering. And so I think that's what I'm really passionate about lately. And that's actually why I wanted to move into regulatory affairs because I didn't speak too much about this role because I'm quite new in it yet. But it is a role where I'm focused on making sure that the food label is truthful and not misleading. So any of the claims that you see, like for example, low fat or high in fiber, has to be substantiated by nutrition testing. And there's also regulations on like type heights for certain titles and all that. So there's a lot that goes into a food label. So back to your question, that kind of topic has really fueled my passion for moving into regulatory.
Wow. I totally understand that. And, we take nutritional labels for granted. Like we do look at them for information and such. But I'll be honest, I think unless you go and take the time to really learn how to read a label, they're sometimes not really intuitive. I'll be honest, like you mentioned, like high in fiber. And I think I only learned not that long ago that it has to be, I could even be wrong with this. I think it has to, if something has more than 15% of your daily value, it's high in fiber. See, I don't even know.
Yeah, there's just so many ways to interpret these claims, and not everyone knows what these claims mean. So definitely think that regulatory and regulations around it are so important. And I think that like learning about all this has made me a more well-rounded dietitian, not just knowing about nutrition, but also understanding how food and nutrition and products are developed and go to our grocery stores.
For sure. I'm learning stuff every single day, and it's so easy to not it's so easy to get caught up in not understanding how if you go on autopilot to the store and you might not, you want to do your best to take care of your family, to get the right foods and such, but then it can just become so overwhelming that you don't want to go search out the information even though you know you should, just because it can get, again, overwhelming.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like in-store dietitians are so great because you can book an appointment with them and they can walk you through that information and just give you what you need without all the fluff and all the filtering of understanding what's true and what's not. So if you ever are confused, definitely look at your local in-store dietitian.
I'm laughing too because I'm like, okay, this is a very good reason for promotion of that, because I have seen the signs and such and I've kind of thought about it, but maybe I really should take it into consideration, because now I'm kind of kicking myself because I'm like, okay, I probably should have, especially given my family's health conditions and such. And also they're just picky eaters, and maybe if they could have like helped me. And you can go online, but again, the internet's even worse when you're trying to get food information. There's just this food's good, this food's bad. It could be the exact same food. And it's just, it's too much. It's too much to navigate, honestly.
Yeah, and having to balance that amongst all the other things happening in your life is always really difficult. There are some good resources out there that are written by dietitians too. For example, unlockfood.ca. That was all written by dietitians, and they have topics and articles on pretty much all things nutrition and food and different disease management recommendations. So that could be a good start.
Thanks for sharing that, because I think that's also another key part is, if we are going to look online, I guess, yes, look to who the source writer is. It's probably better to go with someone who's a dietitian than someone who, although it might work for them, who maybe didn't go to school for that, just because, you have those years of experience, the regulatory bodies, and it really gives some validity to what you're saying in terms of trying to find good quality food information.
For sure.
And moving forward, I know we're coming close to the end of the episode, and I just maybe wanted to talk a little bit more about you in the future. And I was curious, is there any skills or topics that you're interested in right now or you're looking to improve?
Currently focusing on strengthening my regulatory knowledge and learning about food labels, as well as the product development process. The role I'm in really works closely in product development from start to finish. So I feel like that all that information eventually will really help me become a more well-rounded dietitian and help clients and inform them better when it comes to shopping at the grocery store.
And do you mind if I just dive a little deeper into, we have been kind of using the term regulatory throughout the episode, and maybe for some individuals, they might not know quite what that means. So what does regulatory mean in this context, and how does it apply to food?
So regulatory affairs is a career where basically there's legislation or laws around certain products or industries. So there's industries in like medical devices as well as food, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics. But I primarily work in food, and regulatory affairs specialists work with businesses and the government to make sure these products meet the government requirements and are safe for public use. So when it comes to, let's say, like a drug, a regulatory specialist might work with the developers to make sure that it fits all the regulations and is safe for somebody to take and is actually effective. And when it comes to food, it's making sure that the product is also meeting regulations. So, for example, there's regulations for cheese or meat or all different types of foods and about what kind of ingredients or food additives in certain amounts can go into them. So our job is to make sure that everything in the product formula matches the regulations, and as well, everything that's on the food label matches what's actually in the product.
Okay, okay. That sounds like it is very tedious work.
Yeah, it's not as customer facing as the previous in-store dietitian role, but there's definitely a lot of paperwork. But you do get to have a lot of input in the product development process. There's a big team that you're working on, and you're also working with designers like for the labels. So it's really interesting. It's not for everybody, of course, but I'm finding it really, really fulfilling so far.
That's amazing. And I could imagine that regulations are constantly changing too, so it's always going to be a role that's necessary.
Yeah, it's really interesting now. The government published a new guidance on something called the front of pack. Have you heard of it?
I have not actually.
So starting in the year 2026, I believe, all products that are high in either saturated fat, sugar, or sodium will have to have something called a nutrition symbol or a front of pack symbol on the main surface of the label. And that's what we're currently working on now, where most food companies are. So that's a regulatory change that is happening. And we are really excited, but also really stressed to work on this right now.
Yeah, that's a big project. I mean, that's going to, not just for you, but for all the different companies, that's going to essentially change every product label that's out there right now.
Yeah, every single product.
Wow. Wow. Okay, I'm going to have to look into that, but at the same deal, although I can imagine it's frustrating for a lot of companies, I do see where the government's coming from with this, and coming back to, even though it would be great to have an in-store dietitian talking with you, maybe someone doesn't have the accessibility to be able to do this, so having more information that's easy to understand would be very useful for them. So I can understand where it's coming from.
Yeah, hopefully it does end up being helpful for the end consumer.
Yes, because I know even now, I mean, I know personally because I deal with fat research and all that, and I know when I say fat research, like understanding about fat crystallization and that respect. But for a long time, I did not understand saturated and unsaturated fats, and it sounds so sciencey, and for so many individuals, that can be very confusing.
That is true. There's a lot of big words in there, and we may not know what they do for our health, but hopefully some of this nutrition symbol will help consumers make healthier choices.
I hope so too. And, we are coming down to the end of our episode, and there is two questions that you know what, let's do three. Let's do three. They're quicker questions. So the first one is, I guess we could speak to maybe being the in-store dietitian, or you could speak to the role that you currently are in, but what do you love about your job?
In both roles, I love that I have a job that aligns with my values. And I think one of my core values is integrity. And as a dietitian, I get to practice that by ensuring that my advice is evidence-based and is truly helpful and does no harm. And then on the other side, working in regulatory as well, it makes I get to apply this because I make sure our food labels are truthful and not misleading. So if there's anything I've learned is that regardless of whatever job you're doing, it doesn't have to be like the one you absolutely love. It's just making sure that your job aligns with the workplace values that are important to you.
That's really good advice. I think a lot of people need to hear that. And I guess that kind of slides into the next question, but you kind of touched upon it in the episode, but let's go back to it. If there was a student who was deciding to pursue a career path of being a dietitian, what advice would you give them?
I would say learn from my mistake and build connections early on in your student career. And also be a risk taker and be open to new experiences. Like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, you never know where those experiences will take you. And those unique experiences will help you stand out for future positions.
Amazing. And the last question I'm going to ask you is, where can people find you?
You can find me on my Instagram. I'm not as active as I used to be, but my handle is Jasmine Kwok RD.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to link that in the show notes. So once again, thank you so much, Jasmine, for taking time to come on the show. You really opened my eyes to the number of roles that a dietitian can do and how there's nuances to each of them, but also just, I loved hearing your story about just, it doesn't always have to go your way, but you never know how something can really teach you skills that you can use later on. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, and it was great to learn a bit more about you as well.
That was episode 74 of the FoodGrads Podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found by clicking on the Student and Grads tab on the FoodGrads website. There, you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Did you enjoy this episode? Then please let us know on your favorite podcast platform and rate us 5 stars. It helps us to spread the word about this podcast and get the word out about how great this industry is. Once again, thank you to our partner Careers Now for their continued support of this podcast, so we can continue to deliver great conversations like the one you just heard. As someone who studies food, I get asked a lot of questions about the nutrition behind the emulsions that I make. And although I know this is an important aspect to consider when creating new food products, that's just not where my research lies and what I'm focused on. I'm focused on studying the structure of foods, looking at them as a material, like you would look at building blocks for a building. I look at the structure relationship about how does this equal the overall structure, like texture. And while interviewing Jasmine, it really reminded me about why I am not someone who should be giving nutrition advice. It's not my wheelhouse, and I don't study it, so I shouldn't be giving nutrition advice about it. The conversation with Jasmine really went to show about why her title is protected. It's because she has foundational knowledge from her degree, but also that clinical experience, and then as well the ongoing upkeep that has to be maintained in order to constantly have that title. And it's pretty strenuous, and it makes sense because although they might not be doctors in the traditional sense, like a family care doctor, they are still in that medical realm giving advice, and you are what you eat. And that's why you want to have someone who understands how food affects the body, but is also constantly evolving their knowledge and better getting specialized in different areas. So it was really good to hear Jasmine talk about this, but as well talk about how you need to also pair that technical knowledge with some business skills, which is something that I didn't expect to hear from Jasmine, but it was really refreshing, and it goes to show that being a dietitian involves encapsulating many different fields, and it's also something that's good to remember just in life in general is be open to any opportunities that come into your life, as you never know where it's going to take you. It's also a good way to go about your life. Try to live your life in the most fullest way and pick up as many opportunities that you can, and that makes it all the worth. Anyways, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.